All right, welcome to another episode of the I Tried to Be Straight podcast with Nate and
Susie.
And we are so happy to be here. We just got back from New York and I got some new clothes. These are them. And yeah, I love that city. If you're from New York, I am jealous because it's fantastic. And first time exploring it that well.
Yeah.
Did you have fun in New York?
I loved it. Nate got new clothes that he's excited about, but I had a Caesar chicken wrap and I cannot stop thinking about it.
That's what you can't think about?
I
Not the bagels, the pizza?
No, it's the wrap for me.
Okay, what I can't stop thinking about, and sorry, I wasn't sure if you're done talking about the wrap, and I'm interrupting, and I'm so sorry.
I love it.
We got this bagel that was avocado and egg and all these things. So I'm like, a New York bagel, you have a New York bagel, but I need some substance, right? And then so I wanted the avocado, I wanted the eggs, I wanted bacon, and they put like a half inch of bacon. It was so much bacon. So I'm getting this thing and I'm like, I can eat a lot. I'm going to eat this whole thing. It was maybe a few pounds, but I grabbed this bagel from this person. I'm like, this might be too much for me, but we are a few miles from our apartment. So I'm like, I'm going to eat this thing. I go to town eating this thing. I didn't even realize it was cut in half, which makes sense because
it's massive.
I could not eat it. I could not finish it. And I did the math. That thing was probably 1,300 calories.
It was so good.
I ate most of it.
And it just sat in your stomach
and
like a rock.
And then we walked 4 more miles.
Yes.
And I got really, a lot of indigestion. And I farted.
At a store. He destroyed this poor woman's trip. Singed her eyebrows.
I had meat sweats from the bacon. I farted in a store. She left immediately. Susie walked in after.
And it burned my nose hairs off.
So I can't go back to New York. That's it.
Wait, is this your public apology to that woman?
I'm so sorry. If you see this, I feel so bad. But that's enough about this story.
That's
Anything else you want to say about New York?
Because
we're talking
speaking of bodies.
Speaking of bodies.
We have an amazing guest here today. Her name is Meg Cohen. And Meg has over a decade of experience in working with clients, helping them get free from their shame, purity culture, and really embracing a healthy sex life. So we are so excited to have Meg. Meg, you can introduce yourself.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. How do I follow a story like that to open?
Have you ever had bad indigestion?
What's the worst poop story you have? Don't do it. Don't do it.
I think I'm going to skip to I'm super glad to be here talking to you.
Do you want to, I don't know how do we even get back on track after that story?
Straight to sex. We're going to talk about, she's a sexologist. So
yeah.
We're going to talk about sex really kind of for the first time on the podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for this. And she's from New Zealand, if you didn't notice, which is awesome. But we would love to hear a little bit about how you got into what you're into before we dig into kind of how gay people struggle with coming out and changing their mindsets about sex. But anyways, could we hear a little bit of where you came from?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I grew up in New Zealand. I grew up in a small little rural town. I was a good Baptist girl. My parents became Christians when I was 3. So pretty much from 3, I remember growing up in that environment. And I was maybe 11 or 12 when my parents did their own deconstruction process before there was a word for it, before they left over a bunch of stuff in the church there. But I was free to keep going to youth group and they encouraged me to do that. And so I kept going to youth group. I grew up through those years, and then I ended up putting myself into like a really fully evangelical church at probably 18 as I left home and traveled and things. And so my experience was of purity culture, was real lived experience. You know, I was baked in a lot of the theology of purity culture. And while it's a little bit different how we experience it here in New Zealand, I mean, I'm an 80s baby, so we had a lot of those same resources that were coming through True Love Waits movement, ICA's Dating Goodbye, all of that kind of stuff. Because in New Zealand, we don't have large amounts of industry ourselves and those sorts of things. And so we imported a lot of your culture into yours specifically. No, that American kind of leaning and explanation and theology around sex and bodies and purity culture and abstinence only sex ed and that sort of stuff. We really imported it here. And so that was my experience. I was in ministry in a church for 5 years. I was employed there. I was all in. My husband also worked in the church. He was there for 8 years. I left to have babies like good Christian wives do. And he stayed on another few years. And as I went through that process of having kids and he reached burnout in his job and a whole lot of things that happened, I really had a lot of questions and started that process of deconstructing myself. And also we had a really beautiful family member come out to us, and that process really made us look long and hard at our theology, because suddenly these weren't just concepts about gay issues or gay rights. That was suddenly very personal. And one of their concerns was, what are Evan and Meg going to say when they find out? And am I going to be accepted or loved by them? Which broke our hearts, because we were like, there's no way we wouldn't love you. But it just broke our hearts that that was a part of how they felt in telling us, and that one of the hard things for them about coming out was wondering how we as Christians were going to react to them. So that's kind of my background. But then also, because I grew up in purity culture and was married young and did all those sorts of things, I had a really terrible sex life for a big chunk of my, for our early marriage. Super, super lovely guy. Like, I love him to bits. But we just didn't have some of the education that's really essential about desire and arousal. We didn't know enough about our bodies. I had just this huge weight of expectation that he was not even aware of. He had a more liberal kind of Christian upbringing, so very different to my more Baptist sort of upbringing. So, your pain often becomes your mission and your call, I guess. And so that's why I went, and after we ended up getting secular help, because all of the help that was inside the church was no help at all, to be quite honest. And so we got secular help, and we went down this process of learning about each other and our bodies and all that kind of stuff. And I just went, man, there's nobody talking about this from a church context. By then I was on my way out of the church anyway, but that's I guess the short version, which isn't so short, but there you go.
I'm curious, what was the advice that you got from the people within the church? What were they telling you to do to fix this issue that you were having?
Yeah, so I got told as a woman that it was as many women in purity culture do, that it was my responsibility to take care of his needs. If things weren't going well in our sex life, that I might need to just take one for the team. Was the advice. I mean, we laugh now, but this is common advice, that you might not like it, but you need to take one for the team. And advice around praying more, and did we really have Jesus at the center of our relationship? I'm like, we were in boots and all in the church. We were fully invested in this mission, and I was like, yes, we pray regularly together. We do all of these things that we're told we're supposed to do in a Christian marriage, and it was not improving our sex life. And because we didn't have good skills on communicating about sex, or we didn't understand our bodies and all of that. So
I imagine that perpetuates this negative culture in the church walls, but then also within your relationship with your partner. Like, what does that even do to a person if they continue down that road?
Yeah, I think if I speak personally from my own experience with some of those messages, it really made me internalize the feeling that I was bad or broken, and it was already existing from, puberty and teenagehood, as I was going through those developmental milestones and feeling so conflicted about, sexual feelings in my body and all of that. So I already felt that from that purity culture upbringing. But then when you also have issues in a marriage, and for me, like, my husband was like, it's fine, it's good for me, I'm up for it, like, and I was like, it's not good for me, I'm not up for it, it's not. And so I felt like I was the one that was bad and broken. And I have to give him so much credit, because he was so kind and so gentle and like walked alongside me through that learning. But I really, really internalize those messages. And I see this with so many clients that they feel like they are bad and broken because of the way they're experiencing desire and arousal and sexual feelings and relational issues.
You mentioned you work with a lot of queer clients, and that theme of I'm bad or broken, that really threads into our community. So I'm curious, what are the patterns that you're seeing within your queer clients?
Yeah, so this is a universal thing that can affect anybody that's come through purity culture, queer or otherwise. But I think what's interesting, what I see with clients in the queer community, is that often they feel like they weren't even the right kind of bad or broken. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
Interesting.
I have a lot of clients who are like, man, I was a legend at purity culture. I was so fine to resist men because I wasn't interested in them. Or I was so fine to not cross boundaries with women because I wasn't really that into them. And so there's this dissonance of like, I felt bad and broken, but I also felt like I was kind of nailing purity culture. And so that's a really interesting dynamic to unpack.
It's funny how you're talking about how you were feeling all these things with purity culture, and you were feeling like you were kind of ashamed about these things. And it seems like you can probably relate a lot to what almost every gay person feels, in that we just don't feel like we are allowed to really want like sexual pleasure for ourselves. Like we kind of, I've talked to some gay people that have come out of the closet fully after getting married and all of this, and they sacrificed their sexual pleasure for God and for this woman. They're just like, I guess I just don't get this. Is that something you talk through? And what are the ways to start unpacking that mindset that I don't deserve sexual pleasure?
I mean, this is a big one, right? That often people who come out, they don't feel like they deserve sexual pleasure or even loving, connected relationship either often. And I think that it's interesting to go back to the root of a lot of the early Christian church story around this. And I talk a lot about in the origin of purity culture, actually a lot of it comes from that aestheticism, that separation that we see, like St. Augustine and some of those old guys who were, known as fathers of the faith. And they really esteemed the spiritual and the intellect as higher than the body. And so we see the separation that follows all the way through. And then obviously we have our beautiful cultural phenomenon, cultural phenomenon of purity culture that solidifies that. All of our True Love Waits movement and all these sorts of things that tell us, deny your body, deny the flesh. And so that message carries for the queer community as well. Deny your body, deny those feelings, deny your desires for loving relationship. And in doing so, you will get closer to God, or you will be honoring God, or and when we're talking about that, I love to go back to the idea that, and this is for people who are staying within a Christian framework or who want to hold elements of that Christian faith. And I work with clients who some do and some don't at all. They're like, that ship sailed, I'm not interested. But some do want to hold that framework still. And for them, I'm like, go back not to the fathers of the faith, go back to the origin story of divinity, cared about humanity, made themselves human, and was present for redemption. That's the kind of core story of the gospel, right? Divinity, cared about humanity, came into a body and then outworked that in the world. And so I'm like, do you not think that you also can have an integrated experience of the spiritual and of the body if you actually go all the way back to the start? And and I think that can be an interesting reframe to think about for people. And then also I have people who are like, I'm not interested in the theology. I've chucked that out, and I just want to get on with loving my body. And so we deal with that a different way. But I'm not sure if that entirely answered your question, but it was it's an interesting loop that comes up in conversation with clients a lot.
No, absolutely. That was great.
Yeah. It's interesting to me how it's always, there is that narrative of you need to deny your body, your heart is wicked. And yet, you're looking at all the science and all the research, and it is so harmful to suppress those things. And it has not only physical and mental toll, but just everything. It really impacts everything. Curious, how do you even begin to get back into a place where you're back in your body, embodied, actually listening to yourself, listening to your heart?
Embodiment is an interesting thing when you've come out of purity culture and you've suppressed your body so much, because it takes a while to build trust. It takes a while to go, oh, that's what my body's telling me, and I can listen to it. And sometimes in those initial learning stages, what our body is actually telling us first, the first messages we're receiving are like, panic, freak out, no, that's not okay. And so we have to learn to sit with those parts first and go, oh, hey, body, I can see that you are being really protective of me. That is your first job, is to keep me safe. Yeah. And so sometimes before we can even sit with the really good feelings of you're allowed pleasure, you're allowed loving connection, all that, sometimes we also have to just sit with the idea that it's all right for my body to be freaking out a little bit here. And I'm going to sit with my body, let it know that it's safe. I'm going to do lots of beautiful nervous system regulation techniques to help me realize, oh, it's okay, it's safe to have these feelings. And feelings are great messengers, but they're not always telling us the truth either. And so sometimes we just have to sit with them, notice them. The physiological effects of emotions and feelings in our bodies typically last about 60 to 90 seconds as an initial physiological experience. And so if we can sit with an uncomfortable feeling for 60 seconds or 90 seconds and go, okay, this is what it is. And then once we've done that, we can begin to relax and go, okay, now what do I want to do with that feeling? Yeah. This is the message that's come to me in my body. Do I agree with it? Do I want to run with it? Do I want to reframe it? Do I want to choose a different way? Do I want to move my body into a different state so it can feel different? And then do I want to actively choose a pleasure activity and practice sitting in that. So I think it's a multi-step process. We can't just, and I see this a lot, that people beat themselves up because they're not in their bodies and embodied and feeling pleasure, and they're not sexy and sultry and all these sorts of things. I'm like, that's cool, but it's also cool to just sit with and honor where your body is now and the fact that it needs safety.
Yeah, you can't force these things. You got to give it time and let your body feel these things. You can't just make it happen. I'm definitely someone who wants to just get to the finish line and figure it out right away. But I think with the gay people especially, a lot of us have been holding back for so long, and then we get out there and we're just kind of full on, and that's a whole nother question. But I guess before I get into that, because that might be a little bit of a conversation, what are some stories of working with queer people? Because I know you've worked with some queer people. Where what do you see the most commonly that they are struggling with their sexuality, purity culture, going through these kind of things where you've worked with people?
I think the first thing that often comes up that I see is the connection and belonging piece. When you're leaving a church system, that's hard work for anybody, but I see it particularly strong for my gay clients who are like, I don't know what the result of this is going to be. And many of them get to the point where they're like, I absolutely want to come out. I'm at the point where I can't do anything else. I can't live in the shadows, in the closet. So I'm going to come out now, and I know that is going to cost me. That is going to cost me friends. That is going to cost me family potentially. I have, I have clients who I've walked alongside as they have lost their role in ministry, pastoring. They have lost their church community. They're no longer allowed in leadership. All these sorts of things. People who've lost family partners. And so I think that is anybody coming out of the church is potentially losing community, but the way I see it affecting my queer clients is so deep. And that's before you can even get to the unpacking, what do I like in my body? What about relationship with other people? How am I in healthy queer relationship? All of those sorts of things. Before you can even get to that, you've got to because belonging is such a big piece of us that creates safety and stability.
Yeah.
And when we don't have that sense of belonging or community or family or support, it's quite hard to even go on and process those other parts of your sexuality and desiring relationship and things like that. So that would be something that I see come up quite often.
You mentioned something about it's going to cost them something, and I think we have some people who are listening to this and they're still in the closet. They haven't come out to anyone, but they're really wrestling with this, and they're waging the cost of their community, their family, and then waging the cost of potential harm to themselves and being suppressed. What are some of the side effects that you've seen from somebody suppressing themselves for a long time, like white knuckling their life, making sure nothing happens, nothing slips through their cracks?
Yeah. I mean, I see people get physically sick,
Wow.
physically unwell. This comes out in the body at some point somewhere. And so it's really common. This is common for women who've been through purity culture. And I don't know that there's loads of research on how this affects the queer community specifically, but I just wouldn't be surprised if there's similar correlations, that there's a lot of autoimmune issues because you're actually fighting against your own body. And that's what a lot of autoimmune issues are, is your body is launching an attack on itself in many ways. And we know that where there's a lot of religious suppression and, how women in purity culture and high control religious environments, there's often a higher prevalence of autoimmune disease in there. And I just wouldn't be surprised, and I don't know if there's any research on this. If anyone knows and like let me know, but I just wouldn't be surprised if there were similar correlations. And that's a huge cost. That's a huge cost to say, I'm suppressing myself so much that my body is now struggling to function in a healthy, regular kind of way.
Do you find that same effects because this is something that I think is interesting, not just it's prevalent in our society, but I've experienced it within the church of this is what a woman is supposed to look like, and you kind of are traversing church culture, not wanting to be too much and also having to be this, but also can't make somebody stumble. So like all these, like, this is what the right woman looks like, but don't look too right, or a man might lust after you. and then I personally, I'm going to speak for
Not
myself.
Me. I won't. I'm good.
Then I left most of that behind, that culture, but then I'm in this queer culture where this is what the optimal queer woman looks like. And for men, I think it's prevalent as well. This is what the optimal gay man looks like. And how do you
He's right here.
He's found him. No, I don't.
You all can stop looking.
We're good. We found him.
Oh my gosh. It's funny because Nate stumbles upon himself. Like, you make yourself stumble.
Weird, but
anyways, how do you even begin to unpack those messages of, I need to control my body, I need to do these things, I can't eat these many calories, or whatever?
No bagels. No more bagels.
No more bagels for you, Nate.
Only vacation bagels.
Optimum man, remember?
I only eat them on vacation, and that's actually...
And we all pay for
I have
it.
body dysmorphia, actually.
You and your body are good and beautiful, and you eat the bagels if you want the bagels, okay?
Thank you. I'm glad you're here.
Let's go back to the question. So I think that I know that there are really strong connections between diet culture and purity culture, just like we know there are strong connections between rape culture and purity culture, right? And this diet culture piece tells us, and so it's in society, but it's also really strongly come through the church, that you have to look and present a certain way. And I think as we have, if we have experiences of coming out and coming into the queer community, that is also a community where those messages can exist, and they just might be packaged slightly differently. And so I think it's really important that in either space, whether you're still in the church or whether you're strongly involved in your queer community, that you go back to you and your body and the messages and the reminders that you and your body are good. And that there are many ways to be masculine. There are many ways to be feminine. And that should be true in the church, and that should be true in the queer community. That there are no bad bodies, you know? There are only good bodies. And I see this as well. It's a real ableist kind of view as well that we see in the church, that people who have disability or long-term chronic illness, those sorts of things, that they're constantly going for healing. And I had 12 years of chronic pain syndrome, autoimmune disease, all these sorts of things. When I was in the church, I had every visiting preacher ever pray over me, you know, and so those messages that you and your body are bad or wrong, I mean, it's baked into Christianity that you and your body are sinful. And so we are counteracting very core messages and multiple intersections of things here. Yeah, big question. And I think we just have to start with saying, okay, how can I remind myself that my body is good? And sometimes it's really hard to go to the very positive. I don't actually really like the kind of toxic positivity, like, I'm great, I love my body. If you don't right now, if that's not true for you right now. So I much prefer an approach where we go to more body neutral.
That's good.
What if I could just appreciate my body for carrying me through the day? Or what if I could appreciate the breath in my lungs today? Or my body, whatever it is that you're able to do, that you can find a small amount of gratitude for that is neutral. Start with that. If you can't find your way all the way to, I'm amazing, look at me, I'm, the perfect specimen.
No, that's actually so, I mean, it just speaks to me so greatly right now, because I was even thinking about this once we got back from New York. I felt like we walked a lot, and I felt really proud of what my body could do. I never had like a hurting joint or something that made me feel like my body couldn't take me through the day.
You weren't proud of what my body could do.
Well, Nate kept saying, do we have to walk?
Okay, I do have an injury.
He does have, but anyways.
Keep going, sorry. I was talking about the fart, but.
Oh, that too. But I felt really proud about my body's capability to take me through the day. And I even turned to Nate one day and I was like, man, one day we're going to be older and we're not going to be able to do all this walking that we're doing. And in that same day, we were getting ready to go to this like fashion show thing, and I was looking at myself in the mirror, criticizing all the things I hated about my body. And I just had this like moment of, how can I hold these two thoughts together at the same time, where I'm so proud of the physical activity I can do. And, if Nate was like, let's go on a run, I'd be like, yeah, I can do it. No hesitations. But then come back home and like so deeply be ashamed of who I am in this body. So that's just something I'm unpacking right now. And so that body neutral thing is just hit me right where I needed.
Yeah, and it's a practice to learn to soften the way we look at ourselves in the mirror. And like mirror work can be quite confronting. And when you look at yourself, usually you scan through your body, you look through your body and you go, and you're critical of so many things. And it's interesting to scan through and do that once as you look in the mirror and go, oh, that's interesting that's what I'm saying about myself. Now, what if I soften my eyes and the way that I look at myself? What can I appreciate? My body's carried me through today. Look at these legs. They're, they're strong. They walked all around New York. How beautiful. And then slowly over time, you can learn to bring a little more of a positive reframe to how you view yourself and view your body. As someone who struggled with disordered eating and bulimia for years, my teenage years and into my early 20s, like this was a real process for me. And so learning to, and then all the chronic illness and things alongside of that, learning to look at my body, and now I'm aging, so I've got to, those elements as well. And I think it's really a practice to look at your body and go, oh yeah, you're doing good. Like, you're getting me through, and I'm grateful for you.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So good.
So good.
I was thinking, kind of going into that a little bit, but I think when we come out, we're going through a lot of different expectations that are put on us with body, but also talking about comfortability and how we're like thrust out of our comfort zone. In the church, a lot of us lose that comfort, and a lot of us are just kind of in this limbo phase where we're very uncomfortable. We're kind of scared. We're losing things. Some of us, I've talked to some people that are going to lose so much of their world. Some of them would rather stay in the closet than lose their world. But most of us will eventually decide to change things, because eventually this all builds up. Sometimes when we're 30, like myself, or like 26 for you, I think. If you're getting to that point and you're trying to figure out how to do this, what would you say would be the first things you'd tell someone in that position? How do you get out of that place of fear and move into, I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do you do that in a healthy way and step out in that season without taking on the common insecurities and the fears and some of the messy roads some of us take in the queer community?
Yeah.
That's a long question. So sorry.
No, I like where you're going with it. And it's actually something that I wanted to say earlier and forgot to, but we talk about the fear and how much people are going to lose. And those are true and valid. And I don't ever want to, make light of those things that people lose. But I would say, in answer to this, there is also so much that you will gain, and you might not see it initially. And I see this with clients all of the time. And I was actually talking with one client who, they were the person who ended up leaving ministry, and now they are in a relationship with a person they love. They have just bought a home. They are in this beautiful, and it's been such a joy because I've walked with them through the entire process. And I'm just so proud of them. But we actually, just a week or two ago, when I saw them last, we had this conversation that, wow, if I hadn't done that, I never would have gained the love of this amazing person. And I am feeling all these incredible things that we are now living in our own home. And they have had family members who they had some connection with, but they didn't know really if that was a strong connection that would last them coming out. And they've had those family members just become beautiful allies and supportive. And so there is also so much that is to gain and that is possible on the other side. Are you still going to have lots of awkward conversations? And yes. Is it still going to be painful? Yes, there's going to be hard things. I'm not denying that. But I say this to people who are deconstructing as well, like, your questions are good. And we've been taught in fundamental evangelical spaces that we're supposed to have a lot of certainty. We're supposed to have black and white, wrong and right. And actually, in those in-between spaces, your questions are good, and they'll lead you to good places in time.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess for me, the challenges of coming out of the closet, again, sometimes feel like they outweigh the pros to coming out of the closet. But I think a lot of people don't realize how much it affects you when you're holding this all in. How it's subtle. I think I didn't realize how unhappy I was until I came out and had something to compare it to, because it's been my whole life being closeted. And so I think, and what you've seen and the stories you've heard, even with all the hard things, primarily people are usually happier after the fact of coming out.
And often they're able to come to a genuine place of being able to say, I do love me and I do love my body. And that's a gift to be able to, for anybody, to be able to be in that place that you can get to where you can go, oh, I love me, I love my body, I love who I am in the world. That sense of letting who you are find a home in you is a journey for anybody. But when you are also doing that with something that's so core to your identity as your sexuality and how you love and how you have connection, that feeling of letting who you are find a home in you is beautiful. And it's not until you experience that feeling. And you say, I remember clearly the work I did myself years ago to go, oh, this is who I am. And I've landed with that and it feels really good.
Yeah.
And so I think when you are closeted, you maybe can't appreciate how beautiful that feeling is.
Yeah.
It's not until you land in it yourself.
So good.
Yeah. Curious if we can pivot to a little bit more of a spicy conversation.
Yes. I love how much we're getting in here.
Meg said
There's so much in this episode. I'm really into this. This is so good.
This is good. So I have heard, and Nate can chime in for the guy side, but with the women coming out of Christianity, stepping into their queerness, there's a lot of hesitancy in actually getting intimate with someone, and it's probably a lot of things. Some of it is conditioning, the other parts are probably just historical stuff that might have happened. But how do you even begin to step into an intimate relationship with someone when you're just so unsure, maybe tightly wound? I don't know.
I think a really, really important part of this first is to actually make sure that you get the education that you didn't receive in purity culture.
That's so
like get yourself some good comprehensive sex ed.
Wow.
Learn about actually your anatomy, how it works, learn about desire and arousal, how those show up in your body. There's so many things that we often missed out on in purity culture. My own personal journey with that, I was having my first baby and I still didn't have a name for the clitoris. I had found it by this point, but I didn't know that it was a whole organ of its own and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's a lack of comprehensive sex education. And if you are struggling with feeling comfortable with another person, I would say first work on getting comfortable with yourself and your own body.
That's good.
Do you know what happens when you touch your own body, and can you do that without feeling shame? Can you appreciate the way that desire and arousal show up for you? Can you begin to trust that you are safe in those feelings with your body yourself before even with another person? And often I have clients feel really dumb because I'm trying to think of a good word, but they just feel dumb because they don't know a bunch of stuff, and often they're in their 20s or 30s and they're like, I don't know this stuff and I feel like I should. And so going and getting that comprehensive sex ed is super important.
Yeah. Anatomy is sexy. You heard it here first. Yeah, it is.
No, I definitely can relate because I didn't really do much with women either. And so I was 30 and, hadn't really kissed anyone seriously. So I can relate to all of that. It's all new to me. I think from that though, I think going into gay culture, I was still figuring out my faith, definitely didn't want to go too far, want to take it easy. But when I was getting more serious with guys, I was definitely struggling with what do I actually want and feel is right for me? How far do I want to go? Because I do want to, I still am holding some to my old sexual ethic, but trying to figure out what my new sexual ethic is. How would you recommend establishing that as a newer coming out gay person? Because it's been something that's very heavy on my thoughts.
Yeah, I love that you use that phrase, and we do have to create a new sexual ethic post-purity culture. And it's something that has, there's a bunch of pillars in a sexual ethic. It's about how do we like to communicate? How do we think communication is important? What are the things that we value? And so that can be things like honesty and transparency. Those things are not exclusive to our Christian experience or what so what are some of the things that we value? What do we think about consent and respect within a relationship? Where are the lines of those things for us personally? What about the you know, the sex ed do we need that fits into that? So how am I going to navigate STIs, STI diagnoses, and how I tell a partner about that? Like, we need to think through all of these different things. And yeah, so there's these different circles of sexuality that we've often drawn our ideas from, like how we've been taught about sex socially, and how we view connection and intimacy and relationship expectations, and all these things help to influence and help us figure out what our new sexual ethic is.
Yeah.
And in purity culture, we've had this real moral certainty kind of thing, like this behavior is wrong and bad, and that doesn't work anymore, especially for the queer community, because like, especially I have a lot of women clients, so women who are seeing women, and they're like, I don't even know yet where the penetration piece of this all fits in, because like, how are we going to do that? How do we want to, you know? And so you have to develop a whole new ethic around all of those pieces. And what do I think about that?
So yeah, I mean, that's actually a really interesting question, because I was talking to my friend about this and telling him, like, you know, I haven't really had a lot of sexual experience, and he was like, well, how do you define sex? And I in my head I was like, penetration, like that's what to me is sex. And he rightfully so educated me a little bit and was like, well, it could mean a lot of different things for especially queer women. So I mean, what are the different iterations that you've heard or not experienced, but like, you know, seen it within your clients? We'll edit that too.
Wow. No, we're not going to edit that.
This is so true, that in purity culture, in Christian circles, we have this very heteronormative view of what sex is, that it's penis and vagina intercourse. And that's because that's the one that typically gets us the babies. That's the one typically that, you know, is the virginity piece and all of that. And so when you are outside of that, when you're like, okay, we're not talking about penis and vagina intercourse, how do I define sex? And it's pretty individual, you know. There's oral and anal and all kinds of play, and you get to decide what for you quantifies a sexual experience, like kissing and making out. You'd be like, hooking up with somebody in that way, that feels sexual to me. Okay, cool, you had a sexual experience with that person. There's not the rules that we thought there were around this. Even with heterosexual clients, they're like, oh, well, I didn't have penetration, so I'm all good, I'm fine. But we had anal sex or whatever. And it's like, okay, like if you're cool with that, cool. It's just so individual and interesting to me how we justify and how we make sense of these different experiences that we're having and wanting to have.
Totally.
Yeah. No, tied into that, shame is something a lot of us deal with. I think purity culture gives it, but also we have a different kind of spin on it, being gay. With any sexual experience, there's, especially the first few times where I like took it a little farther than making out, I was like, oh my God. I felt like this kind of pit in my stomach and kind of this like level of shame on me, like, oh, I don't know if I was supposed to do that. And it just hit me, all the shame. And later I thought about it, processed with somebody, and I didn't actually feel like I violated my code. My code was still developing, so that's the thing. But it felt like kind of just a shame dump from my past. So how do you differentiate shame from just your instincts?
That's a good question, because for a lot of us, shame does feel very baked in, right? Yeah. And so often it's quite hard to differentiate and to trust our instincts initially. And so this is where, again, I go back to education. Like, it's important to go back and educate yourself about, okay, what things do I think I maybe could or should feel shame for? Let's actually write those things out. And sometimes you have to see it clearly, because you're going to have conflicting feelings in your body initially. So just like you processed with a friend and you reflected back on it, give yourself a space where you can actually reflect back on those feelings that are coming up for you and go, okay, is this an appropriate thing where I should feel shame? Have I been disrespectful, non-consensual, like because in those times, then that can be a message like, hey, that behavior maybe wasn't cool, and you need to think about that behavior and address that behavior. But if you were within the bounds of all of those things like consent and respect and what you and the person had agreed on, then it's about rewriting it for yourself and going through that process of thinking through it and going, okay, I actually don't need to feel the shame over that. And I really do see that when we shine the light of awareness on the stories of shame, they lose their power and they lose their grip on us and on our hearts. I can't remember who said it, but I saw a quote a while ago that said something about shame can't live in spaces where stories are told freely, or something. Like, it was a beautiful quote. I need to find it. And I think it's really true that if we can shine the light of awareness, if we can talk about these things that historically we would have been too scared to bring up, then we can begin to, and from a neuroscience geeky kind of point of view, it's really, really interesting how that actually helps us to trim those pathways of shame that were laid down in puberty and adolescence often. That's the thing that really gets me about purity culture, and the fact that it grips adolescents at the stage where their whole brain is rewiring and reworking. And in that time, they're getting these messages of shame. And so we're going back to some really historical ways of thinking, and we're having to trim those neural networks and kind of rework them and shine light on them and go, okay, I can think differently about this. And then slowly over time, you develop a different type of instinct or intuition around that. Intuition, interestingly, is something that they can now scientifically measure. Intuition is how you go from A to Z without knowing all of the steps in between. But intuition is always built from the files that we've gathered over the years and over our life. And so, for example, I talk about this a lot when I talk about protection and safety. I work with Protect, who's an organisation here in Australasia. So protection from violence work that we do. Wow. And when we talk about it from that point of view, we're saying if you grew up in a crack house, you've got a very, very different set of files to someone who grew up in a white picket fence, never knew harm kind of environment, or whatever environment you grew up in. You've built files around what is safe and what is dangerous and what is shameful and those sorts of things. And so we actually have to reprogram, or not reprogram, but just give our body and our intuition new files to work with. So that's why I'm so big on the education piece. That's why I'm so big on the neutrality piece, because it's just get the education in there so you've got better files to draw from, and then you can start to have better experiences.
That's so good.
So good.
Man. One last question for you. For somebody who is listening to this and they're thinking, I don't even like sex. It's sex does not take up any part of my mind. Why is this important for them?
Well, I think it's important to say that if you really don't like sex and don't want to have sex, you don't have to. That's honestly, it's that simple. You get to have agency over your body. That's so good. You get to say what you do and don't want to do. You don't have to conform to any type of sexual narrative that says this is how you have to show up. You don't have to be hypersexual. You don't have to be super into it if you don't want to. With that said as well, though, there are so many beautiful elements of exploring yourself, your body, connection with another human in that sexual space. And it can open you up to new ways of thinking and viewing the world, to have intimate connection with a person, or to have pleasurable experiences with a person. You learn about yourself in new ways. You learn about who you are as a human and how you like to relate, and so there's loads of beautiful things that being sexual can bring to your world. one of the things that I like is that when we talk about the erotic, we're not just talking about what we do with our genitals either. We're actually talking about our feeling of aliveness, our feeling of even creativity, our feeling of being in ourselves, in our bodies, and feeling embodied. So I do think that the sexual realm, it's about so much more. It's about feeling alive. So balance those two things. One, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But if you are interested in exploring this, there's so much aliveness that it can offer to your world.
That's so good.
And so encouraging for people who are maybe just shut down in that area completely because of past traumas or hurts. That's really good.
Yeah. No, I love how much we've covered and how well every topic was covered. I just feel like we gave a lot of really good resources here. So I can't thank you enough for giving us your time. This was fantastic.
Yeah. Can I ask you one more question? Just because I think you're so cool. I'm just so curious about this work that you do. How have the past over 10 years of work changed you personally?
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good question. I am not the person that started out in this work. Like when I went back and started retraining, I was still on the fringes of church, and I was still navigating, trying to help people in their marriages, in their Christian marriage, right at the beginning when I was real undercover about this work that I was doing. And now my process of realizing that I don't have to feel shame about being sexual, about getting healing in this space. Like as I slowly built my courage in those first couple of years when I was first starting in this work, now I just give way less fucks. Like, okay, you can like me. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear here, but I'm like, I don't care as much about if you like me or don't like me, if what you think I'm saying is true or right or whatever. I'm just like, I see how much this work helps people, and that's what I care about more than your opinions of me. So like that, at a really personal level, that's how it's changed me. Like I don't care as much about people's opinions of me, and that's like, that feels pretty great to be in that place where you're like, I know that this work helps people. And you know, I have these beautiful experiences, like people who have vaginismus and can't have penetrative sex in a heterosexual relationship, and then I work with them, and I just got a message last week like they've got a baby because they were able to have penetrative, and I have like a couple of babies every year that because okay, now we can have penetrative sex, and then I have these beautiful clients who are like, I finally got the courage to come out, and I'm now in this beautiful loving relationship, and we own a home, and some of them are finding ways to have families, and you know, not that having a family is the end goal that we all have to aim for, but when it's something that people desire and long for, and then you get to see that come to be, or, you know, I'm braver in the world now, and I've got the job that I really want because I'm not caring as much, and I'm being my full self. Like, I just, it's beautiful, beautiful work, and I just count it such a privilege. I'm so grateful.
It's inspiring to interact with somebody who's so comfortable in their skin, and even the way you talk about your work, it's it just makes me feel like, man, like what areas in my life am I really selling myself short in? Because I don't know, it's just your energy, the way you speak about your clients, your work, it's infectious.
It really is. I like you. You're cool.
Oh, well, like you guys, even with your bacon stories.
Just be glad you're not sitting by me. No, just the right amount. You just get rid of all the shame, and then you never know what will come out. Literally. Or in. Oh God. No, thank you so much. I would like to, are there any resources you'd recommend? Have you written any books? I didn't see any, but are there any resources we can get from you? Where can they connect with you? Would you like people to connect with you? too.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm on Instagram at Meg C. Cowan, nice and easy to find. And I've got a website, megcowan.com. I've written a resource called Hotter Sex in 10 Days. And it works whether you are queer, heterosexual, whatever.
Awesome.
It's about connection and developing intimacy in your relationship, and like, what is hotter sex really? You know, it's not actually about being sultry and sassy and all, unless you want to be, of course, but you know, it's all about what is hotter sex to me? What does great connection look like to me? It's aimed at couples, people who are partnered, but that's one resource. And then there's also on my Instagram, you'll see there's a highlight and there's a whole stack of resources on there and people are welcome to reach out and ask me questions. I'm in my DMs and chatting to people. So yeah.
Fantastic.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. We really enjoyed this interview.
Thank you.
This is awesome.
So I hope you're enjoying season 2. I said we'd get sexier, and I think we did.
We got sexier, gassier.
Somehow way sexier and way less sexy. Like you're
at the same time.
you're feeling sexy, but also not.
But also real. It's authentic.
But some people are into that.
Yeah.
Some people are into that. So, someone enjoyed that too in that way.
Right.
We're going to move on. Thank you for being here today. We have a Discord if you want to chat with us and with others that are going through this. You can find that link in our bio. We also just started our Patreon. We're going to be doing monthly chats. So if you want to come chat with us, ask any questions, jump on there and like us, follow us, share us.
Yeah.
We're happy to be here. We're happy you're here.
Yeah.
And
thanks for listening. We'll
having fun.
see you guys next week.
Next week.